An important aspect of Half-Life 2 is the characters, something even Valve feels is true. Their faces are a huge factor in this, which is what we will focus on in this video. To help discuss this, I have pulled sources from the 20th anniversary documentary, the game's developer commentary, the original version of Half-Life 2 Raising the Bar, and the uncorrected version of Half-Life 2 Raising the Bar. To begin this journey, we need to go back to the beginning, the very beginning.
We wanted to finally do real characters. We knew that from Half-Life 1, the way that players would respond to having any character talk to them was like way beyond the reaction that we expected. Like when we figured this out in playtesting, like if Barney would follow you around and shoot things, suddenly you just love this guy, and you love the scientist, and you love these characters. So we knew we wanted to just bring that like way up to the next like levels beyond what we could imagine.
With development for Half-Life 2 beginning in the final years of the 1990s, Valve began reconsidering how their animation systems and how the faces of their characters were going to look in Half-Life 2. For their characters' faces, they wanted to push away from the cartoon stylings of Half-Life 1 and into something more realistic. This meant in some cases they wanted to use photos of real people.
So we cast people that were real change vendors in front of supermarkets. We cast waiters in restaurants.
Over these closing years of the millennium, Valve's artists had started selecting some of their first faces. One of these faces would be for the cut character Odell, who was originally intended to be on the Borealis. When that section of the game was cut later, his face would eventually be reused for Odessa Cubbage.
When I was in junior high school, I took karate classes, and that was my old karate instructor.
Another face selected by this point was Barney.
I tried this experiment with putting a grid on Scott Lynch's face and shooting him from the front and the side so that we could get points from this grid in 3 space for the geometry, and we got shots of his texture, and we found a good way to model a reasonable head, of his geometry, and then project the texture onto it, and then abstract it or stylize it enough so that it didn't look totally photographic, but it looked like a kind of a real person.
Occasionally, when somebody hears the history, it will, generate a light bulb. But no, I don't get accosted.
No one's asking you for beers or anything?
No, or buying me beers.
All the faces that they had worked on by this point were shown off at SIGGRAPH in the year 2000. In the years after SIGGRAPH, Valve would find more of the faces they wanted. Dr. Kleiner and Alex, who were both shown with different face models in 2000, would debut with new looks at E3 2002. Alex would be visualized by Jamil Mullen. Not only was she Alex's face, but was also the basis for Alex's animation sets. Dr. Kleiner's recasting had multiple layers to it. Valve were wanting to build some visual connections to some of the NPCs in Half-Life 1.
Archetypes. We wanted to create narrative links between Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2 through our characters. Our idea was to design individuals who felt like representations of Half-Life 1's archetypes, so that players might find them familiar, almost as though they'd met them in Half-Life 1 at some point that they couldn't quite remember. We based Dr. Kleiner on the scientist model we felt was the most iconic, and his personality was largely shaped by Hal Robbins, whose voice and performances had defined the Half-Life 1 scientists.
This design choice inadvertently led them to a man named Ted Kord.
One day, when we were in the thick of trying to figure out this character, Dr. Kleiner's face came into focus as we happened to share an elevator with an accountant from an office on another floor of our building. And looking at him, it was clear that this is Dr. Kleiner's face. Luckily, he was receptive when we asked if we could photograph him for a video game character.
Fear, Gordon.
So we're in the elevator coming back from Starbucks to get morning coffee, and we saw this face, and it's like, that's him! That's the scientist! And he was an accountant in the firm below ours in Kirkland.
Yeah, nothing kind of blows your mind when you've been working all day on this character in your game, and all of a sudden you get on the elevator and you're like, holy crap, it's him.
Well, so I once ran into him at the airport.
Eli Vance as a character didn't exist at this point. Instead, Alex's dad was a man named Captain Vance. Captain Vance used this face, which would later be reused by a citizen, as will be seen. Dr. Mossman's face model was also chosen in this era. Her face was used by her predecessor character, Elena Mossman, a scientist at the Cut Kraken base, from the end of 2001 and beginning of 2002.
I don't suppose Dr. Kleiner has told you a thing about me. I'm Elena Mossman, Kraken's director, although we don't use formal titles down here. I'm just another researcher doing my part for the Resistance.
Her character and look would evolve into Judith Mossman over the next couple of years. During this time, the game's story was a bit different. Rather than a suppression field preventing childbirth like in the retail title, children were still around and working in Combine factories in this version. Character models were created for these children, and they too had photo-based faces. These people would likely be in their late 20s or early 30s by this point. All of the male citizens' faces were chosen by 2002 as well, which we can see in the terminal demo. Thanks to the efforts of the Combine Overwiki, we are able to match the game's credits and the names of each texture to tell which male citizen model is who. Male 01 is modeled after Van Crowder. 02 is modeled after Ted Bachman, who is the Valve concept artist behind the game's synths. 03 is Larry Hurd. 04 is modeled after Valve artist Eric Kirchmer. 05 is modeled after Art Min. 06 after Sandro Consi. 07 is Michael S. Smith. 08 reuses Captain Vance's texture, who is modeled after Joe Cairo. And 09 is Erdine Gersic.
Erdine Gersic was a Bosnian friend from I knew from school. He was like, we want the East European contingent and stuff too, so it was pretty interesting.
There's also the Cheeple. The Cheeple is a lower resolution citizen used for distant activities. In 2002, it was a mainline citizen. It is modeled after Warren Slough. There's one cut male face texture from the beta build named Trav. While Valve did find most, if not all, their male citizen faces by this point, they did struggle to find faces for their female citizens. To this end, they would put out ads to try and hire people.
Citizens. When it came time to design the human citizens of City 17 and the world outside the city, we chose to include a variety of races, ages, and genders. This not only provided narrative context for the Combine's enslavement of all of humanity, but it was also important to us that anyone playing the game could see themselves represented in the Resistance, with everyone on Earth united against the Combine. While we found a number of candidates to use as reference in creating these citizens through our daily lives and connections, we ultimately resorted to advertising in the Seattle Times classifieds to reach the desired range of faces that we'd envisioned. We wanted anybody to feel a part of the world when they're playing it as a player. And so, we found people from pretty much every skin color, different ages, male and female, equal numbers of males and females. Sadly for them, they all had to share the same voice actor.
Sadly for us, too.
By 2003, as seen in the beta build, Valve had hired all the faces for their female citizens. Again, thanks to the Combine Overwiki, we can also match the female citizen models to names. Female 01 is modeled after Joey Peressa. 02 is modeled after Kanisha Spayer. 03 is modeled after Kim Harris-Jones. 04 is modeled after actress Chao Lu. 05 is modeled after Naomi Cotton. and 06 is modeled after Lakeitra Gilbert. There are 3 cut female face textures from the beta, named Laura, Linda, and Tam. There was a point in time when Valve attempted to do hyper-realistic face texturing, but decided to stylize the faces a bit. They felt as though their lighting tech made hyper-realism a bit too uncanny. You can see this more hyper-realistic focus in the 2003 beta build textures for the citizens. Some of these face textures oddly still have the eyes left in, even though the eyes were rendered separately in Engine. By E3 2003, Half-Life 2 had all of its face tech and every face the game would use in place. This included the G-Man, who had his own demo dedicated to his new face. His new face was based on Valve's janitor Frank Sheldon, who was originally considered for Dr. Breen. G-Man's head shape and the face texture from Mr. Sheldon were both deliberately modified by Valve to create G-Man's appearance.
We've been rather busy in your absence, Mr. Freeman.
Dr. Breen, while not being featured at E3 2003, did have his face selected by this point. There's originally some discussions as to whether Breen should wear glasses. Despite also not being in any demos, Eli's face model was chosen by this point, as can be seen in the beta build.
Randy Lundeen said, hey, there is a guy holding a sign for work at this exit on 520 every day who has this great face, and he took a picture of his face and he stopped and asked if he could. And so it's like, oh, this is great. I think this guy's Eli. We brought him in and, paid him a couple $100, which is what we were paying people back then. And so that's where he came from.
Father Grigori was also chosen sometime in 2003, as he is in the beta build. He's based on the father of someone who worked at Valve at the time. While all the other characters in the game are based on a single, real person, Gordon Freeman's isn't. Though it is not used in-game at all, Gordon does have a model, used in various artworks related to Half-Life 2. The face for that model is actually a merging of 4 Valve developers' faces: David Spayer's, Eric Kirchmer's, Greg Coomer's, and Kelly Bailey's. First, they merged the faces in pairs, before those merged photos were merged one final time. Greg Coomer's head was used as the starting point for the actual 3D modeling in the software XSI. After a couple of tweaks and the addition of a beard, Gordon's face was complete. In order to get these faces to move properly, Valve would begin pioneering a new, advanced facial rigging system. This system took years to develop, and appears to have taken place concurrently with the texture work and actor finding. The whole system was based on the medical work of a doctor, as Ken Birdwell explains.
And the theory was, if we could make a character who could act realistically, that would help the player make an emotional connection to the other characters in the game. And at the time we decided we were going to do that, not only did none of the technology work, but I would go talk to industry professionals and they would tell me not to bother because you couldn't do it.
It's well understood that humans are wired to pay attention to faces, subconsciously reading all kinds of information from them. So it's an extremely high bar, and if we couldn't reach it, we'd probably push players away from our characters, not towards them as we hoped. We started out doing a lot of research. It was not heartening. The best examples we could find weren't anywhere near close to being able to be run in real time, while the best real-time ones weren't close to the quality we wanted. We wanted to look as good as an animated movie, but they often took hours to render frames and were totally linear, authored by up to 100 animators, whereas ours had to be dynamic. A character might be trying to speak dialogue or a facial move derived from a player's actions and created by just a handful of artists.
Luckily found a research work done in the 70s by Dr. Paul Ekman. And he had just broken down how the face works and how humans make expressions. And he had this incredibly wonderful, formal, clinical description of what a face does and the sorts of things that normal people do with their face.
These requirements eventually led us to Dr. Paul Ekman's facial acting coding system, a system for taxonomizing human facial movements done back in the 1970s. It gave us a vocabulary for describing facial movements throughout our tools and code, and a target to aim for when designing our characters' faces. With it as a framework, we started a many-year process of iterating on how we built faces and heads of our characters. Where others had tried taking bits of Ekman's work, we wanted to try to use it all. That meant a lot of time spent figuring out how to do each piece within the tight performance constraints we had. But we also spent a lot of time just looking at people and faces, trying to find the extra features that would add the most value, like skin elasticity, teeth shadowing. In the end, while we weren't able to do everything we wanted, we did manage to get the pieces we thought were the most important to a convincing facial performance level on our characters.
The earliest efforts to get this system to work was sometime around 2000, with a preliminary version of it being shown off at SIGGRAPH. The system would mature quite a bit for E3 2002. And then again for E3 2003. The eyes for each character specifically took its own Herculean efforts.
Added Ken's eye tech to that, which was amazing because he really modeled and he went deep into the research of how eyes work.
Eyeballs was about 9 months, just on eyeballs. But you have to do each step. You have to get the shape of the eye right. You have to get how the eyelid gets pushed by the cornea and the ball of the eye. So as your eyes move around, your lower lid, your upper lid, all of those get shifted slightly, and it's all automatic. It was wonderful. The day I got it working, the characters went from looking like interesting dolls to, Alex just looked at me. Oh my God, this is working.
Eye shader. Another critical part of getting character faces to be convincing was in the eyes. Humans are great at reading eyes. There's a part of your brain dedicated to it, down to knowing where somebody's looking based on the reflections on the eyeballs. But there are all kinds of subtleties that matter. Eyes aren't actually spheres. Eyelids get distorted by the cornea moving around underneath. Eye movement can increase the odds of blinking. Eyes don't actually line up directly behind the pupil. They're shifted slightly. All these little details might feel small or unnoticeable, but the absence hurts the believability of the character. We worked on eyes for a long time, iterating our eyeball model and feature set little by little. Some things required external interfaces, like what things in the environment were interesting to look at, where others were automatic, at a subconscious level in the AI, like blinking, an obvious requirement, but one that's subtly confusing if it's wrong. Eye reflections had a particularly large impact. They're ultimately a tiny amount of real estate on the screen, but the difference they made was enormous. We knew we were finally done when we reached the point where, with our eye shader off, a character looked like a doll, human-like, but unconvincing in some way that was hard to describe. But when we turned it on, suddenly it felt like a human was looking at us.
Valve developer Yann Bernier would develop a dedicated tool to create the choreographed scenes throughout Half-Life 2. It's called FacePoser, and did allow for the manipulation of character faces to display the emotions that were wanted during these scenes. Though the models in different areas of the model's faces had to be tagged and marked as to what can move, as seen here with Dr. Kleiner's retail model. The modeling for the faces was extremely detailed and included individual teeth. In order to optimize these details, including the eyes, a level of detail system was implemented. The characters' mouths have certain weights set for them to help run the mouth through physics. The code that runs the facial animations can suppress certain movements if needed. For example, if a character is told to frown and to perform dialogue at the same time, the dialogue is prioritized, suppressing the frowning movements around the mouth. In fact, the code and expression system is so robust that it makes it unlikely, if not downright impossible, to have the face do something impossible during runtime. Even sending random face data will still result in a facial expression that a real person could make. It might look goofy, but it is still plausible. Sometimes too much data might force something neutral, as the code won't know how to interpret it. There was also one final component to getting faces and the rest of the character to look how they wanted.
Character lighting. In the first year of development, we were struggling to get our characters to feel as realistic as we wanted them to. There were actually quite a number of different problems, all of which eventually required specific technological and artistic improvements to fix. The first major problem was lighting. At the time, lighting technology in games had many shortcuts, some due to performance, but many due to misunderstandings of how it all works. To make characters look good at the time, models and textures had to be created with much of their lighting solution baked into them, like shadows and glossiness. The characters looked cool, but they also looked like video game characters. We started building Alex with this approach, because that was how you were supposed to do it. We used the bake solutions and lit her like a movie actor, essentially as if she had a custom lighting rig that followed her around and ensured she always looked good. But it didn't really work. The range of lighting environments and the dynamic nature of video games meant that she'd look great in some environments, but always end up looking terribly unrealistic at some point. We tried iterating on our lighting rig, increasing its capabilities, but eventually it felt like we were at a dead end. Returning to the drawing board, we decided to try a different approach. We built her and the lighting and the textures from the ground up, throwing everything away, focusing on not on what we wanted her to look like in our ideal lighting, but on how things were supposed to work in the real world. It might seem obvious, but it wasn't how it was done, at least not in video games. When looked at outside the game's renderer, these models and textures actually looked worse than the previous versions, but we managed to methodically pull out all the shortcuts and misconceptions about how light and texture and graphics cards worked and put it all back together. After all that was done, when we were finally able to look at Alex in-game with her new models and textures in a dynamic environment that kept her visually consistent at all times, well, she looked great. Totally seamless and part of the Half-Life 2 world.
The textures required for Alex, for example, are these ones, and they're just for her face. Each do slightly different things for lighting. The textures for the rest of her character model are the same. The first meeting at Dr. Kleiner's lab was the primary scene for testing all forms of character acting, including all the face tech.
No, there's nothing to be nervous about.
What, Cat?
We've made major strides since then. Major strides.
What, Cat?
Doc, since he's not taking the streets, you might as well get him out of his civvies.
I mean, Kleiner's lab was the first prototype that we did of how characters could work together in a scene.
Yeah, it was like a proof of concept. Yeah. We kind of had to make that work, and put everything we could into it at the time to test all the technology, and then know from there what can we do, what else can we do with this.
Turning it into a performance that would be engaging rather than just audio, radio play kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, that was the point where that scene was where it all started to come together, all our theories and hopes for what the experience might be.
And it all went completely smoothly. It was out of the box. It was amazing.
As the beta build for the game from 2003 is naturally unfinished, it does mean certain scenes don't always have face movement.
Gordon Freeman, let me get a look at you. My God, you haven't changed one iota, man. I've been saying all along, Gordon will come when the time is right.
I didn't doubt you for a minute, Eli.
Well, come in. You'll feel right at home here. It's Black Mesa writ small.
The version of Kleiner's lab in this build does have working facial acting.
No,
There's nothing to be nervous about.
What cat?
We've made major strides since then. Major strides.
What cat?
Doc, since he's not taking the streets, you might as well get him out of his civvies.
Barney's introduction scene and some of the train station citizen NPCs also had working facial animations.
Please help me. There's been some kind of mistake. What are you looking at?
It's me, Gordon. Remember? Barney from Black Mesa. Sorry for the scare. I had to put on a show for the cameras.
Yes, Barney. What is it? I'm in the middle of a critical test.
Sorry, Doc, but look who's here.
Good grief. Gordon Freeman.
For the retail game, the citizens actually have multiple face textures, being used on different types of citizens. These types are set in Hammer, and are Downtrodden, Refugee, and Rebel. As seen here, Male 07 has 4 different face textures. Various named citizens in the game as well will have permanently selected faces. Boxcar Joe at the start of the canals will always be Male 07. Leon at Shorepoint will always be Male 01. Noriko will always be Female 04. And Arlene will always be Female 01 as examples. Since Counter-Strike Source was developed alongside Half-Life 2, it ended up inheriting several faces and heads from Half-Life 2 for the hostages. 3 are the same as retail Half-Life 2. While the final one is Dr. Kleiner's SIGGRAPH model. As the episodes are built off of Half-Life 2, they reuse most of the same technologies and textures of the retail game. However, Episode 1 would add a new type of shader to help bring in small reflective highlights to characters' faces, through calculations called Phong lighting. This was retroactively added to retail Half-Life 2. What you are seeing is the texture for Alex that adds these highlights. Like Half-Life 2, some citizen-based characters in the episodes get specific faces, like with Griggs and Sheckley.
Be adequate!
What the hell does that mean, anyway?
I don't know. Sounds like something the Forts would say.
While it appears that no character in Half-Life Alyx is based on a real person, Frank Sheldon would come back for early Source 2 character and modeling tests in 2010, as described in the final hours of Half-Life Alyx.